The man who never existed. Sometimes the person you know best is the one you never truly knew at all. For 40 years, Margaret Henderson had lived a life that seemed beautifully ordinary. She and her husband, Richard, had shared a quiet existence in a small town where nothing ever really changed. People knew them as the polite, soft-spoken couple who always smiled at the neighbors, hosted tea on Sundays, and went for walks in the evening. Richard had worked his entire life at the same local bank, reliable, steady, and humble, the kind of man who never missed a day of work. Margaret often said she was lucky. She had married a man who lived for peace and routine. But peace, it seemed, is only calmness before the storm. It began on an evening soaked in rain. The wind howled through the trees, and thunder rolled somewhere far beyond the hills. Richard had been sitting by the fire reading a book when he suddenly stood up, put on his coat, and said, "Just going for a short walk." That was the last thing he ever said to her. He never came back. At first, Margaret waited patiently, thinking he might have stopped by a neighbor's or gone to the store. Hours passed. The rain grew heavier. His dinner grew cold on the table. By midnight, fear began to take shape. She called the police. Search teams combed through the town, through the nearby woods, and even the riverbanks. Helicopters scanned the area, flyers were printed, interviews aired. But Richard Henderson had vanished. As if the earth itself had swallowed him whole, days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The investigation turned cold. People started to whisper. Some said he must have run away. Others thought he had debts or another family somewhere else. A few cruel ones even suggested he had taken his own life. But Margaret refused to believe any of it. She knew her husband. He wasn't a man of secrets. He wasn't the kind to simply disappear. Still, she couldn't explain the truth either. As the months dragged on, the house grew quiet. Too quiet. The smell of his aftershave faded from the bathroom. His slippers gathered dust beside the bed. Every little thing became a memory, frozen in time. Then, one dull afternoon nearly a year later, something changed. Margaret woke with a sudden urge, the kind she couldn't explain, to visit Richard's old study. It was a room she hadn't entered since the day he disappeared. Somehow she couldn't bear to disturb it. When she opened the door, the smell of old paper and faint tobacco filled the air. The curtains were half drawn, and thin streams of light cut through the dusty air. Everything was exactly as he had left it. His books lined the shelves in perfect order. His reading glasses still rested beside a cup of dried tea. She ran her hand along the bookshelf. Every title was familiar: history, economics, old novels. But then, one book caught her eye. It had no title, no author, just a plain brown leather cover. Curious, she reached out to pull it. It didn't move. She tugged harder. Suddenly, there was a click, a sharp mechanical sound. And then, the entire shelf shifted slightly forward. Her breath caught in her throat. Behind the shelf, a thin crack of darkness appeared, a hidden door she'd never noticed before. With trembling hands, Margaret pushed the shelf aside. It slid easily, revealing a narrow stairway descending into the shadows. A cold draft rushed out, carrying the smell of metal and dust. She hesitated, her heart hammering. Then she reached for the light switch. Nothing happened. Grabbing a small flashlight from the desk, she took a deep breath and stepped inside. The stairs creaked beneath her feet. When she reached the bottom, the beam of her flashlight revealed something she could never have imagined. The small underground room was filled with metal cabinets, shelves, and boxes. Weapons hung on the walls, not old antiques, but modern guns, knives, and small gadgets she didn't even recognize. On a table, several passports were spread out. She picked one up. The name read Michael Cooper. Another said Jean Dubois. Another, Rashid Malik. Different nationalities, different countries. But the face on every passport was Richard's. Her knees almost gave out. In one drawer, she found stacks of cash, dollars, euros, yen, even currencies she couldn't identify. In another, strange electronic devices, small cameras, encrypted notebooks, and a laptop locked with a password. Margaret's mind raced. Her gentle, quiet husband, the man who loved gardening and crossword puzzles, had lived a secret life. But how? And why? Hours passed before she could pull herself together. She sat in that hidden room, staring at the evidence of a life she never knew existed. Every memory now seemed tainted. His late nights at work, the phone calls he'd stepped outside to take, the scars he said came from fixing the fence. None of it made sense then. It made perfect sense now. When night fell, Margaret went to the police again. But before she could even speak to the detective, 2 men in black suits appeared at her doorstep. They carried no identification, but somehow they already knew her name. "Mrs. Henderson," one said quietly, "we believe you found something that doesn't belong to you." Before she could respond, the other man gently pushed open the door and stepped inside, glancing around. "Where's the room?" he asked. "What room?" Margaret's voice trembled. "The one behind the bookshelf," the first man replied calmly. They walked straight to the study, as if they'd been there before. Within minutes, they found the hidden entrance. One of them went inside, scanned the area, and came back with a small briefcase. "Mrs. Henderson," the taller man said, "we need you to understand something. Richard Henderson was not who you thought he was." Margaret felt the world tilt beneath her. "He worked for us," the man continued, "a covert operative. He handled intelligence work for several international agencies. He was a ghost, moving under different names, different faces, protecting national interests. His entire life was classified." Margaret's voice broke. "Then, where is he? Is he alive?" The man's expression softened. "He's alive, but his cover was compromised. His disappearance wasn't an accident. It was an operation. We extracted him to protect both him and you." Tears welled in her eyes. "Why didn't he tell me?" "He couldn't. Everything about him, his job, his identity, even his name, is classified. The moment he revealed the truth, both of you would have been in danger. You were safer not knowing." Then he reached into his coat pocket and handed her an envelope. Inside was a short note, written in Richard's handwriting. It read, "I had to choose between the truth and your safety. I chose you." Her hands shook as she read it. When she looked up, the men were already leaving. "Forget everything you saw," one said, "for your own good." The next morning, the hidden room was gone. The shelf was back in place, sealed shut, as if it had never moved. The passports, weapons, and cash, all gone. Days passed. Margaret barely slept. She couldn't eat. Every time the phone rang, her heart leaped, hoping it would be him. But it never was. Then, one evening, as she sat by the fireplace, something caught her eye. A faint glimmer on the bookshelf, a reflection. She stood up, walked closer, and noticed a single book sticking out just slightly. It wasn't the same one as before. She hesitated, then reached out and pulled it. Click. The same sound echoed again. But this time, instead of the wall sliding open, a small drawer beneath the shelf popped out. Inside was a small black box, sealed with tape. She opened it slowly. Inside lay a tiny silver device, like a communication chip, and a folded piece of paper. The note said, in the same familiar handwriting, "If you found this, it means they're watching you now. Don't trust anyone. Wait for the signal." Her heart froze. She looked around the room. Outside the window, a black car was parked across the street. Its engine was running. 2 silhouettes sat inside, watching. Margaret stepped back slowly, the note still trembling in her hand. For the first time, she realized something horrifying. Maybe Richard hadn't disappeared because of his mission. Maybe his mission had never ended, and now she was part of it.